Guys, we need to talk about Soul Mate. I know this sounds negative, but I promise you it's not. I honestly have no idea what I was expecting before going into the series. I heard it was BL, and I heard it was starring Ok Taec-yeon from 2PM, and that's pretty much all I needed to be very invested. Like I said, I have no idea what I was expecting, but it sure as hell was not this. Again, it sounds really negative, but it's not. It's just so different from what I've seen before. And I need to talk about it because whatever I just watched, it rearranged something inside of me in all the ways that are possible. Before we dive into the story, I have content warnings for you and, of course, spoiler warnings because I want to go into detail. As for the content warning, I will be talking about someone who tried to unalive themselves, as well as topics that are going to be tackled are terminal illness and homophobia. So if that's not for you, just maybe skip this one. Okay, so let's talk about the drama. Soul Mate is a Japanese production that is available on Netflix, and it was filmed in 3 major cities: Berlin, Seoul, and Tokyo. And that's pretty much also where the story takes place over a span of about 10 years. Like I already mentioned, it stars Ok Taec-yeon, who is probably the most known in the K-drama world for his insane villain role in Vincenzo. He stars alongside Hayato Isomura as the other main male lead, and from the beginning, the multilingual nature of the drama had my head spinning. But it fit the narrative really well, actually, and it just added to the emotional whiplash that this drama was about to become. The drama starts with a very brief and very messy introduction to Ryu, one of the main characters, because that's pretty much what his life had been before fleeing to Berlin, and that's where the first 2 episodes are set. Over the course of those 2 episodes, we learn more about his past and why he came to Berlin in the first place, and it's not a pretty story. Basically, he left Japan after a tragic incident to reconcile with his childhood friend Sumiko, who happens to study in Berlin. Eventually, he opens up to her and tells her that one of his ice hockey teammates and friends, Arata, had confessed his feelings to him, and it didn't go really well.
好きなんだよね。お前のこと。
Ryu doesn't reject him, but he rather freezes because he doesn't know what to do. So far, so realistic. The problem being that another teammate, Seiichi, overheard the whole conversation, and he means well by telling the others and he wants to support Arata, but the problem is he kind of outs him with a devastating outcome. Arata is being met with both subtle and extreme homophobic behavior from his teammates, and at one point he just can't take it anymore. He jumps off a building, but he's being hospitalized, and that's where Ryu flees to Germany. He's being consumed by an enormous amount of guilt because he keeps telling himself that it is his fault that things ended the way they did. Through a series of circumstances, he ends up in a church and finds himself in the confession booth, where we are introduced to the other character. He doesn't know that someone is there, or at least he just Ryo just lets it all out and cries it all out, but in Japanese. Johan, a Korean amateur boxer, overhears everything, but before he can do anything about it, the church suddenly goes up in flames. Later, it is revealed that the church was actually set on fire by the priest's son, who is also gay himself and is not accepted by his father, so even the side characters are reflecting what Ryu feels inside. Ryu, watching the church go down in flames, apologizes one last time to Arata and just accepts his fate that he might be dying right here on the spot. But of course, someone jumps in last second and saves him, and of course that someone will turn out to be Johan. They meet again, and through the following time span, Ryu learns a little something more about Johan. Johan is actually being paid to purposefully lose boxing matches, but upon meeting Ryu, something shifts in him, and he decides to cut ties with that part of his life. And him and Ryu end up spending a little quality time in and around of Berlin. And when I say quality time, I mean they literally give each other the hope they need to face their futures that are waiting for them in their respective home countries. They exchange numbers and return to both Japan and Korea. Ryu quits hockey but stays in college. At around the same time, Arata wakes up from his coma and him and Ryu have somewhat of a closure talk. He is still ridden with guilt to what happened. But Arata kind of tries to tell him that he expected the outcome, like he expected to be met with homophobic reactions. But I still found myself asking, if he expected it all, why did it still break him? And I think it's pretty simple, because knowing something intellectually and actually living through it are two completely different things. So in the end, the closure talk still felt a little awkward to me. I don't know if it was intentional or if it was just the writing, but something just felt off. In the meantime, Johan decides to surprise Ryu, and he just unexpectedly pops up in Japan. He only has 2 days though before he has to return to Korea and eventually start his military service. So the two spend those 2 days to the maximum, giving it all they have. Ryu even takes Johan back to his parents, and they hit it off immediately. Those 48 hours are short, bittersweet, and not at all full of the usual BL romance, chemistry, relationship kind of building that I am used to. They're just living, figuring things out as they go. And that's what made it so unbearable and incredibly beautiful at the same time. Shout out at this point to the cinematography and production team, because every scene lands. Like, I am flabbergasted. Over the next 2 years, Johan completes his military service while Ryo is trying to find out where he stands in his own life in Japan. When Johan returns to civilian life, he is met with a new challenge. Mr. Shim, the guy who was behind the match fixing, he is out for Johan's head because he's a... can't say that word on YouTube. Johan, who's now being publicly ashamed of being gay, gets threatened, and people even throw stones through his window. So that's when he decides that he needs to leave, but not for his own sake, but because he doesn't want his sister to be in danger, and he most importantly does not want Ryo to see him this way. But the two of them go looking for him anyway, and they end up finding him. And that's where Ryo suggests to Johan that he moves to Japan with him, which Johan eventually does. So the two of them spend a lot of time living in a small, cramped apartment together. In the meantime, Ryo ended up introducing Sumiko and Seiichi to one another. And those two actually did end up together, and they ended up getting married. And Sumiko now tells Ryo and Johan that she's expecting. It is also on that same day at the park where she gets a moment alone with Johan and asks him to take care of Ryo, and he just says, "Leave him to me." Ugh. My heart. Quick side note, there was pretty much a moment in every episode that hit the waterworks for me. I don't know what that show did to me, but that was just the case. And then when I thought I was safe, everyone's happy, of course we weren't. Because tragedy has to strike again, and before the baby was even born, Seiichi is killed in a car accident. What follows is, of course, a lot of grief. But it's also where Ryo and Johan decide that they want to move in with Sumiko and help her raise the baby. So Seiichi, who never got to meet his daughter, was not only the reason why Arata's life was almost destroyed, but he is also the reason as to why the three main characters became a found family. And I actually loved that, even though I was crying. Again. There's a moment where Johan talks to little Kano, and he holds the baby and he sort of is talking to her, but he also looks at Ryo and he says in Korean, "I know what true happiness looks like."
난 이제 알 것 같은데.
And even though there has been no skinship whatsoever thus far, this is a love story. You can't convince me otherwise. And because the story said, you know what we could really use by now? Another gut punch. Johan gets diagnosed with ALS. Johan decides to keep quiet about his diagnosis, but he still works at a nightclub to earn money for Kano's future. But he often gets drunk and he gets into fights with Ryo, and at one point, Johan decides that he's going to leave. So he leaves a very devastated Ryo, a very confused Sumiko, and a very crying me behind and just walks away. The relationship that Johan and Ryo have built so far is not your traditional BL. There's no spice, there's no tension and release payoff. The romance lives almost entirely in the unspoken. There are certain looks that Johan gives Ryo when he's not looking, and Ok Taec-yeon plays that so well, or the way how Ryo talks about Johan when he's there and when he's not there. Like I already said, This is a love story, but not your traditional one. The emotional intimacy is not made through a few scenes, it's the whole relationship. If you're getting into this drama expecting a typical BL experience, like me, you will be definitely caught off guard. Fast forward to the present. Ryu, Sumiko, and Kanao now live with Ryu's parents back in their hometown, and Ryu has taken over his father's business. Sumiko finally tells Ryu about Johan's diagnosis after she has been informed herself about a year ago through Johan's sister. She tells him that Johan is now stationed in a hospital in Germany, and she just tells him to go, which Ryu does. And so a few days later, he shows up in front of Johan. And he reacts in a way that couldn't have been more devastating to me, because Johan had actually come to terms with his fatal disease, but upon seeing Ryu, he just said, "Why are you here? It makes me want to live longer."
나한테 기단다. 원래 엄마가 이래봐. もっと生きたくなるんだよ。
So yeah, like I said, not at all devastating. I'm fine. The show ends with Johan and Ryo being able to spend a few more precious moments together, and Ryo finally being able to say that he loves Johan, and Johan just says it back. And that's how one of the most devastating BL love stories I have come across so far ended. Ever since watching The Eighth Sense, I had wished for another drama to hit me this hard. And Soul Mate did. I know I pretty much only talked about the story, but that's because my review of everything else it has no notes. It's exceptional, 12 out of 10, everything. The cinematography was stunning. The styling and the production design, flawless. I especially need to mention the makeup because finally we have a drama where the characters are not whitewashed beyond recognition. The acting is supreme across the board. I already knew what Ok Taec-yeon is capable of, and I was not disappointed. One final verdict from me as to who this drama is for: it is not a light watch. Much like The Eighth Sense, it tackles very serious issues, and it is not a typical BL. Soul Mate is a quiet and heavy study of two people becoming each other's reason to fight, to live, and eventually to stay.